The moment that stopped everything. It was supposed to be a quiet evening, the kind of Hollywood charity event that Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock had attended dozens of times before, all smiles, handshakes, and polite laughter. The lights shimmered, the cameras flashed, and the crowd buzzed with excitement. But what happened that night would change everything, not just for them, but for everyone who saw it. It started like any other red carpet. Sandra had arrived first, wearing a simple black gown, elegant, but humble as always. Keanu came a few minutes later, dressed in his usual quiet style, dark suit, calm eyes. That gentle half-smile people around the world knew so well. When they saw each other, there was warmth, the kind that comes only from years of friendship built on trust, respect, and unspoken understanding. They had worked together, laughed together, and supported each other through life's storms. To the world, they were just two stars with good chemistry. But to each other, they were family. As they posed for photos together, something in the crowd shifted. A noise, faint at first, then sharper. It came from the far end of the carpet, near the edge of the barricade. Keanu noticed it before anyone else. His eyes, trained by years of caution and instinct, caught a flash of movement. Something small but fast. Security guards began shouting, but it was too late. A man, wild-eyed and desperate, pushed past the crowd and ran straight toward Sandra. In his hand was something metallic, a sharp object, glinting under the lights. The world froze. Without thinking, Keanu stepped forward. He didn't shout. He didn't hesitate. He just moved, placing himself directly between Sandra and the man. One moment, Sandra was smiling at photographers. The next, Keanu's arm was around her, pulling her behind him as the man lunged. There was a flash, a gasp, and chaos. People screamed, cameras dropped, and security rushed in. The object, a broken piece of glass, it turned out, grazed Keanu's arm before guards tackled the man to the ground. Blood stained the sleeve of his jacket, small but shocking against the black fabric. Sandra stood frozen, her eyes wide, her hands shaking. "Keanu," she whispered, "you're hurt." He looked at her and gave that quiet, steady smile, the one that always said more than words ever could. "I'm fine," he said softly. "You're safe. That's all that matters." Paramedics were called. Cameras rolled. The crowd buzzed in disbelief. But even as the world tried to process what had just happened, Keanu kept calm, refusing attention, refusing praise. When the press tried to swarm him, he stepped back. "Please," he said simply, "don't make this about me." But it was already too late. Within hours, the story spread everywhere. Keanu Reeves protects Sandra Bullock from attacker. Keanu's brave act saves co-star at Hollywood event. The quiet hero strikes again. The headlines flooded every corner of the internet. People called him a real-life guardian. Millions praised his courage, his humility, his calmness under pressure. But behind the flash and noise, behind the headlines and applause, there was something deeper happening, something no one else saw. Because while the world was celebrating Keanu, Sandra was falling apart inside. She couldn't stop replaying the moment. The look in his eyes when he stepped in front of her, the sound of the crowd screaming, the sight of blood on his arm. It wasn't just fear, it was guilt. That night, after the chaos had faded and Keanu was treated for the cut, Sandra went to see him. She found him sitting on the steps outside the hospital, still in his torn suit, his arm wrapped in a simple bandage. No bodyguards, no reporters, just him, alone, looking at the city lights. She sat beside him quietly. For a while, neither spoke. Then she said softly, "You could have been seriously hurt, Keanu." He shrugged gently. "You don't think about that in a moment like that." "But why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you do that?" He looked at her then, really looked. His eyes weren't proud or dramatic. They were soft, filled with something both heavy and light. "Because," he said quietly, "some people are worth standing in front of danger for." Sandra's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't have to protect me." He smiled faintly. "I didn't have to. I wanted to." And in that moment, Sandra Bullock realized something she'd never said out loud. That the man the world saw as quiet and distant was, in truth, someone who carried more kindness than most hearts could hold. But what neither of them knew was that this single act, This one moment of bravery would open the door to something far bigger than a storm of rumors, a test of loyalty, and a truth about love and humanity that would soon shake the world. Asterisk when the world started talking next morning, the world woke up to chaos. Every news channel, talk show, and entertainment site was showing the same footage. Keanu Reeves stepping in front of the attacker, shielding Sandra Bullock with his body. It was everywhere. Millions watched it again and again, calling it the most selfless act caught on camera. Reporters camped outside Keanu's home. Paparazzi followed Sandra to her car. Even their friends couldn't escape the questions. People wanted details, quotes, interviews, confessions. But Keanu said nothing, not a word. When journalists tried to reach him, his assistant said gently, "He's not giving statements. He just wants things to calm down." But Sandra wasn't calm. She hadn't slept. She kept seeing the same image in her mind. Keanu's arm, the blood, the quiet look in his eyes when he said, "You're safe. That's all that matters." She called him 3 times that day. He didn't answer, not because he was avoiding her, but because he didn't want to make her feel worse. He knew how she overthought things, how guilt could weigh heavier than fear. By evening, Sandra decided to go see him herself. She found him in his small workshop, the same one he used for fixing his bikes and building random things when he needed silence. He was cleaning a piece of metal, calm as ever. "You're impossible to reach," she said quietly. He looked up, smiled a little. "Sorry, too many people calling. I was one of them," she said. "I know," he replied. "And I knew you'd come anyway." She stood there, not sure what to say. "You didn't have to protect me like that, Keanu. You could have been seriously hurt." He wiped his hands with a rag and said softly, "Sandra, it was instinct. I didn't think." "You always think," she said. "You're the most careful person I know." He looked at her then, and for a second, something heavy passed between them, something deeper than friendship, stronger than fear. "Some things are worth the risk," he said. She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "And what happens when the world turns that into something else?" He smiled faintly. "It already has." She frowned. "You saw the headlines?" "Yeah," he said. "And the jokes, and the love stories they're making up." "They're saying we're together," she said. "They've said that before," he replied gently. "Doesn't make it true, but it hurts," she said quietly. "It turns something real into a story they can sell." Keanu sat down on the bench beside her. "Let them talk. People will forget in a week. They always do." She looked at him, frustrated and amazed all at once. "How do you stay so calm?" "Because I learned the hard way that peace doesn't come from controlling what people say. It comes from not letting it change who you are." Her eyes softened. "You really believe that?" "I have to," he said. "Otherwise the noise wins." The room went quiet for a while. Sandra noticed a small bandage on his arm. "Does it still hurt?" she asked. He smiled. "Only when people remind me." She laughed, tears threatening to fall. "You always know how to turn pain into something gentle." He looked at her seriously. "It's not about gentleness, Sandra. It's about not letting darkness make you dark too." She didn't know what to say to that. She just nodded, realizing that he meant every word. A few days later, a video surfaced online. Not from a reporter, but from someone who had been standing across the street during the attack. It showed the moment right after security pulled the man away. Sandra's voice could be heard trembling as she said, "Keanu, you're bleeding." And his soft reply, "You're safe. That's all that matters." The video went viral again, but this time, it wasn't about fame or gossip. It became something else, a symbol of selflessness, of quiet bravery. Millions shared it with captions like "Real hero" and "Humanity still exists." People started writing letters to him, thanking him for reminding them that good still existed in the world. Others sent messages to Sandra, saying they hoped she was okay. But behind the public love, something deeper was happening privately. Sandra couldn't stop thinking about how close she had come to losing him. Every time she saw his calm smile, every time he said he was fine, something in her chest tightened. And Keanu, though he never said it out loud, began to notice how fragile she looked now. He saw the worry in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. He saw the way her laughter didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. They were both trying to move on. But fate wasn't finished with them yet. because just when the world was beginning to calm down, something unexpected happened. The man who had attacked them asked to speak. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't shouting or violent. He had a message, and it was for Keanu. And when Keanu agreed to meet him, Sandra begged him not to go. "Please," she said, her voice shaking. "Don't risk it again. Not for him." He looked at her softly and said, "Sometimes forgiveness saves more lives than fear ever will." And that choice, that single decision to face danger with compassion instead of anger, would lead to a truth that shocked everyone, even the world that thought it had already seen everything. The meeting that changed everything. Morning was gray and quiet when Keanu Reeves arrived at the small community center, where the man who had attacked them was being held for rehabilitation. It wasn't a prison, it was a mental health program. The man's lawyer had explained that he wasn't a criminal in the usual sense. He was sick, lost, and full of confusion. Sandra had begged Keanu not to go. "You've already risked enough for him," she said the night before. "Why would you want to see the man who tried to hurt me?" Keanu had looked at her with the same calm that made him seem untouchable, yet deeply human. "Because," he said softly, "people don't wake up one day and decide to destroy others. Something breaks first, and maybe he needs someone to listen." So, he went alone. When he walked into the center, the staff greeted him nervously. Everyone knew who he was, but he asked them not to treat him differently. "I'm just here to talk," he said. The man sat in a small room, hands folded, eyes down. He looked thinner, older. The anger that had driven him that night was gone, replaced by shame. When he saw Keanu enter, his body stiffened. Keanu sat down across from him. "Hello," he said quietly. The man didn't reply at first. Then, barely audible, he said, "You shouldn't have come." "Maybe not," Keanu replied. "But I wanted to." The man looked up, confusion in his eyes. "Why?" Keanu leaned forward. "Because forgiveness isn't something people earn. It's something they're given when the world stops understanding them." For a moment, the man just stared at him. Then tears filled his eyes. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," he whispered. "I was trying to get attention. I wanted to show them I mattered. I didn't even see her face until it was too late." Keanu nodded slowly. "Sometimes pain makes us blind, but you can still choose what happens next." "I ruined everything," the man said, his voice breaking. "You could have died. She could have died. And you're sitting here forgiving me?" Keanu looked at him steadily. "You didn't ruin everything. You reminded me why kindness has to exist, even when it's dangerous." The man began to cry. Keanu didn't move closer, didn't make a show of comforting him. He just sat there, quietly, letting the silence carry the weight of truth. When the meeting ended, the man said something no one expected. "I want to apologize to her, not to save myself, but because she deserves to hear it." Keanu nodded. "I'll tell her." Later that day, he met Sandra at her home. She had been pacing, waiting for him. The moment she saw him, her anger faded into relief. "You're safe," she said softly. "I told you I would be." He replied. "So what did he say?" She asked carefully. Keanu took a deep breath. "He said he didn't want to hurt you. He was lost, not evil." She frowned. "And you believe him?" "I do," he said, "because I've seen what pain does to people who stop being heard." She shook her head. "You're unbelievable, Keanu. Anyone else would hate him." He smiled faintly. "Hate's easy. It spreads fast. But forgiveness, that's what changes things." She sat down, her shoulders slumping. "I wish I could forgive like that." "You can," he said. "You just have to stop waiting to feel ready for a long time." Neither spoke. The sun dipped lower, the sky turning orange and gold. Then Sandra said quietly, "He wants to apologize to me." Keanu nodded. "Yes, but I told him it's up to you." She thought for a moment. "If I say yes, it'll reopen everything. The media, the pain, the fear. If you say no," Keanu said gently, "it might close a door that could heal you both." She looked at him. "How do you always know what to say?" He smiled softly. I just listen more than I talk." She laughed quietly through tears. "You really are the calm in every storm, aren't you?" He shook his head. "No. I've just learned not to fight the rain." That night, Sandra sat awake for hours, thinking about what he said. She remembered the moment on the red carpet, The sound of his voice saying you're safe, and how even in chaos, his gentleness had never cracked by morning. She made her choice. She called him and said, "Tell him I'll meet him. Not for the cameras, not for headlines, just for peace." Keanu's voice softened. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," she said. "If you can forgive him, so can I." But neither of them knew what the meeting would reveal. Because when Sandra finally stood face to face with the man who had almost destroyed her peace, he would say something that would change everything they thought they knew about that night, and about Keanu's bravery itself. Asterisk the confession that changed everything. Meeting was arranged quietly, no press, no lawyers, no flashing cameras. Just a small room inside the same center where Keanu had met the man before. Sandra arrived early, dressed simply, no makeup, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a small cup of coffee. She hadn't slept much. Every sound, every memory from that night still lived inside her. She could still hear the crowd screaming, still see Keanu's arm bleeding, still feel the weight of fear that had settled in her chest ever since when Keanu walked in. She felt herself breathe again. His calmness filled the space before he even spoke. "You don't have to do this," he said softly. She looked up at him. "I know, but I want to." A few minutes later, the door opened and the man entered, escorted by a counselor. He looked smaller now, thinner, like someone who had been carrying too much guilt for too long. When his eyes met Sandra's, he froze. She didn't move. Keanu stood silently beside her, giving her quiet strength. The counselor nodded. "You can speak now." The man's voice shook as he began. "Miss Bullock, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even deserve to ask. But I need you to know the truth about that night." Sandra frowned slightly. "The truth?" He nodded. "I wasn't after you. I was after him. Keanu." The room went still. Sandra turned to look at Keanu, confusion and disbelief flooding her face. "What do you mean?" The man swallowed hard, tears filling his eyes. "My brother. He worked on one of your movies years ago. There was an accident. A stunt went wrong. He got injured and never recovered. I blamed Keanu for it. I thought he was responsible for everything. I thought he forgot about us." Keanu didn't speak. His expression was unreadable, calm on the surface, but his eyes were filled with sadness. The man continued, voice cracking. "But after I was arrested, I found out the truth. Keanu had been sending money to help my brother's family for years, quietly, without ever telling anyone. I didn't know. I didn't want to know. I just wanted someone to blame." Sandra's eyes filled with tears. "So you tried to hurt him because of something he never stopped caring about?" The man nodded slowly. "And he saved you instead of running from me. He saved someone else again, even when he was the one in danger." Sandra turned to Keanu, her voice barely a whisper. "You knew." Keanu finally spoke, his tone soft but steady. "I knew who he was when I saw his face that night, but I also knew he was hurting. So I stepped forward, not because I wanted to be a hero, but because no one deserves to live in pain alone." The counselor wiped her eyes quietly. Even she wasn't prepared for what she'd just heard. Sandra sat down, trying to process it all. "You didn't tell me," she said softly. "Some things aren't meant to be told," Keanu replied. "They're meant to be lived." The man broke down completely. "I don't know how to fix what I did." Keanu looked at him with gentle eyes. "You just did. The truth fixes what lies break." There was silence. Deep, heavy, cleansing silence. Then Sandra stood up and walked toward the man. Her voice was calm but firm. "I forgive you," she said. "Not because it's easy, but because hate doesn't deserve to win." The man began to cry harder, his shoulders shaking. Keanu placed a hand on his back and whispered, "Find peace now. For your brother, for yourself." After the meeting, Sandra and Keanu walked outside together. The sky was cloudy, a soft wind carrying the smell of rain. For a long time, they said nothing. Finally, she looked at him. "You knew all along why he did it, and you still protected me." He smiled faintly. "It wasn't about choosing who to protect. It was about stopping a cycle. You never stopped surprising me," she said quietly. He shook his head. "There's nothing surprising about trying to be kind." "Yes, there is," she whispered. "Because the world doesn't do it enough." They stood there in silence, the world moving slowly round them. Then Sandra said softly, You know, Keanu, the media will never believe this part. He laughed quietly. Good, maybe it's better they don't. Not every truth needs an audience. Sandra smiled through tears. You really live by that, don't you? It's the only way to stay human, he said. They parted ways that evening. But something had changed between them. Not romance, not fame, something deeper. It was the kind of bond that forms only when people walk through pain together and come out still gentle. That night, Sandra posted a single message on social media. No photos, no names, just words. Sometimes the bravest people are the ones who heal others in silence. The world went wild trying to guess what it meant, but she didn't explain, and Keanu didn't either, because the truth didn't belong to the headlines anymore. It belonged to them. And as Keanu drove home under the fading sunset, he finally allowed himself to smile, not because the world was fixed, but because, for the first time in a long while, peace didn't feel impossible. When the world discovered the truth for a few weeks, things were quiet again. Keanu kept working on a small film project far from Hollywood, while Sandra focused on her art and charity work. They both tried to live normally, holding on to the peace they had fought so hard to find. But peace never stays untouched for long. It began when someone from inside the rehabilitation center leaked information about the meeting, about the attacker's confession, about Keanu's silent generosity, about everything that had been hidden from the world. Within hours, the internet caught fire. News outlets ran the story with headlines like the real reason Keanu Reeves risked his life for Sandra Bullock revealed. Others twisted it, calling it the secret tragedy behind Hollywood's kindest man. People were stunned. Fans flooded social media, posting thousands of messages, admiration, love, and shock mixed together. Keanu's quiet act of compassion had turned into something bigger than anyone could control. For the first time in years, he became the center of the world's attention, not for a movie, not for fame, but for being human. Sandra's single quotes S phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted her comments. Networks wanted interviews, but she refused all of them. She didn't want to turn pain into publicity. Instead, she went to find Keanu. She found him at his small workshop again, sitting beside one of his motorcycles, lost in thought. He didn't look surprised to see her. You heard, she said quietly. He nodded. Yeah, it's everywhere. How do you feel about it? He gave a small, tired smile. Like I always do. Grateful and uncomfortable, she sighed. You know they're calling you a hero again. He shook his head. Heroes don't exist, Sandra. Only people who choose not to let darkness win. She walked closer, her eyes soft. You didn't just stop darkness. You taught everyone what kindness actually looks like. He looked down. And yet, they're still turning it into noise. She nodded slowly. Maybe. But sometimes noise spreads light too. For a while, they just sat together in silence. Outside, rain began to fall, soft, steady, like the world was trying to calm itself. After a moment, Sandra said, the man from that night, he's being released soon. Did you know? Keanu nodded. They told me. He wants to thank you publicly, she said. He thinks it might help people see the truth. Keanu thought for a long moment. No, he said softly. Forgiveness isn't a stage. It's a choice. It only matters if it stays real. Sandra smiled faintly. You're still the quietest man in the loudest world. He looked at her and said, someone has to be. The next day, Sandra decided to speak up, not for headlines, but for him. She posted a message online with a single photo. Keanu's hand resting on his motorcycle handle. The bandage still faintly visible. The caption read, he never asked for attention. He never asked for thanks. But the world should know. Kindness is his real legacy. Millions shared it within hours. People from around the world left comments. He's what the world needs more of. Real strength is protecting others without needing applause. Thank you, Keanu, for reminding us what love looks like without words. But even as the world celebrated him, Keanu stayed quiet. He didn't post. He didn't speak to reporters. He just kept living, working, and being exactly who he always was, steady, humble, kind. Then, one evening, as he walked home, he found a letter taped to his door. No name, just simple handwriting. Dear Reeves, I'm the brother of the man who attacked you that night. I wanted to thank you for what you did, not just for him, but for all of us. I spent years hating the world for what happened to my brother's accident. But then I found out what you had done for our family. You didn't just forgive, you healed us. You showed him, and me, that there's still goodness left in people. He's changed now. He paints, he smiles, he's learning to help others. He says you saved his soul. Maybe you did. Keanu folded the letter carefully and placed it on his shelf beside an old photo. A quiet reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion echo the loudest through time. That night, Sandra called him. You okay? She asked. He smiled through the phone. Yeah, just reading something that reminded me why silence is stronger than revenge. She paused. I hope the world keeps learning from you. They don't need to learn from me, he said. They just need to remember they're capable of the same thing. The line went quiet. Neither of them said goodbye. They didn't need to, because between them, silence had become its own kind of language, and while the world shouted stories, they lived one that only the heart could hear. The story of how one act of bravery turned into something far greater than fame. But fate wasn't done with them yet. Something unexpected was still coming. Something that would test even the strongest hearts and prove, once again, that kindness can survive anything. The day the world finally understood it was 6 months after everything had happened. The attack, the confession, the leaked story, the noise that followed. Most people had moved on. But for Keanu and Sandra, the silence that followed felt like peace, earned, fragile, but real. Keanu had quietly funded new community centers across the city. Places for struggling artists, veterans, and people battling loneliness. No one knew his name was behind them. He never wanted credit. He just wanted to build something that outlasted pain. One of those centers was where Sandra spent her evenings now. She volunteered to teach acting to young students who couldn't afford classes. It brought her joy, a sense of purpose. Life was soft again, until one evening when a sudden storm hit the city. Rain hammered the streets, lightning cut through the sky. Sandra was still at the center, helping close up when the power suddenly went out. Stay inside. The security guard warned. The streets are flooding, but she had to get home. Her assistant was waiting, and she hated worrying people. So she grabbed her umbrella and stepped out. The wind was wild. Water rushed down the street like a river, and then she heard it, the sound of twisting metal and screeching tires. She turned just in time to see a car lose control on the slippery road, spinning straight toward her. There was no time to move, no time to think. But just as the headlights flashed across her face, another figure appeared from nowhere, running fast, throwing himself between her and the car. It was Keanu. The impact sent both of them crashing to the ground. The car slammed into a pole and stopped. Rain poured, people screamed, and within seconds, bystanders ran to help. Sandra's ears were ringing. She felt pain, confusion, panic. Then she saw him lying beside her, soaked, bleeding, but conscious. Keanu, she whispered, trembling. Why would you? He opened his eyes, breathing shallowly. Because I told you once, some people are worth standing in front of danger for. Her tears mixed with the rain. You can't keep saving me. He smiled weakly. Then stop being near danger. Sirens echoed in the distance. Paramedics arrived quickly, pulling them onto stretchers. As they lifted him, he gripped her hand and whispered, it's just a scratch. Don't worry. But she did worry. She sat outside his hospital room all night, staring at the door, her hands trembling just like they had that first night months ago. When the doctor finally came out, she jumped up. Is he okay? The doctor smiled softly. He's lucky. Few bruises, a minor concussion. He'll recover. Sandra covered her face, tears of relief escaping. When she walked into his room the next morning, he was awake, sitting up, sipping tea like nothing had happened. You really need to stop doing this, she said through a shaky laugh. He smiled. Doing what? Risking your life for me. He looked at her seriously. I don't risk it. I choose it. There's a difference. She sat down beside him. Why do you always choose kindness, even when it hurts? He thought for a moment, then said softly, because the world is already too full of people who don't. If someone has to stand on the edge, I'd rather it be me. Her eyes filled again. You're going to make the whole world cry one day, you know that. He laughed quietly. I hope they cry for the right reasons. She reached for his hand. You've changed my life, Keanu. He shook his head. No, you just started seeing the good in it again. When he was discharged, they left the hospital quietly. No press, no interviews, just two friends walking under a cloudy sky. But by evening, someone had already posted footage from a traffic camera, showing Keanu pushing Sandra out of the way before the car hit. It went viral within hours. People couldn't believe it. Twice he had stepped in front of danger for her. Twice he had chosen peace over pride, selflessness over fear. The headlines this time didn't twist the story. They got it right. The world's quietest man proves once again why he's the most loved. Keanu Reeves saves Sandra Bullock again in a world of noise. Kindness still wins. When Sandra saw the headlines, she smiled. Not because of the fame, but because, finally, the world was beginning to understand what she had always known. That Keanu Reeves wasn't just an actor. He was a reminder, a living proof that kindness doesn't need to be loud to change everything. Weeks later, she joined him at one of his centers. The children were painting murals, laughter echoing through the room. Keanu watched quietly, smiling at their joy. She walked over and said softly, "You're the reason they believe in good people." He looked at her and replied, "No, they're the reason I keep believing it matters." They stood there together, surrounded by light and laughter, knowing that the pain, the danger, the misunderstandings, all of it had led here to something simple, something pure. Not a love story for headlines, but a story of love itself, the kind that heals without words, protects without noise, and forgives without needing to be seen. As the sun set behind the city, Sandra whispered, "So this is what peace looks like." Keanu nodded, his voice quiet, steady, and full of truth. Yeah, peace. Finally, and for the first time, the world didn't just see Keanu Reeves, they understood him.